The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with the usual sounds of political business. Representatives from dozens of species filled the curved rows of seats, their voices mixing together in a dozen different languages. At the center of it all, the massive holographic display showed voting results, trade agreements, and military reports from across the galaxy. Counselor Vexithara adjusted her position in the ornate chair that marked her status as a senior member of the hegemony delegation. Her scaled fingers tapped against the armrest as she reviewed the day's agenda, another routine session filled with minor trade disputes and territorial adjustments. Nothing that would challenge the established order. That was when she noticed something odd. The human delegation section stood empty. Not just today, but she couldn't remember seeing Ambassador Chen for several sessions. Vexthara frowned, her reptilian features creasing with mild concern. Chen never missed council meetings. The small human woman had attended every single session for the past 20 years. Always sitting in the front row of the minor species section, always taking careful notes. Vexithara pulled up the attendance records on her personal display. The numbers made her pause. 3 sessions. Chen had been absent for 3 consecutive sessions. Her entire delegation was missing. For most species, this wouldn't matter. The galaxy was vast and delays happened. But humans were different. They were obsessively punctual, almost to a fault. They filed reports on time, answered communications immediately, and never missed deadlines. It was one of the things that made them useful as client species. She tried to remember the last time she had actually spoken to Ambassador Chen. It had been during the Vote on Mining Rights Expansion Act 7742. Chen had stood up to speak against it, as she always did when the act affected developing worlds. Her speech had been passionate but pointless. The major powers had voted it through anyway, just like they always did. Vexithara dismissed the thought and returned to her work. Humans were a minor species. If they had some internal crisis to deal with, it wasn't her concern. But as the days passed, the empty seats began to bother her more. Other council members started noticing too. Councillor Zephlin of the Ethereal Collective mentioned it during a break between sessions. Strange about the humans, Zephlin said, his ethereal form shimmering slightly. Chen was always so present. Perhaps they're dealing with some colonial dispute, Vexthara replied. These younger species have so many growing pains. But when a full week passed with no word from the human delegation, the council's automated systems finally flagged it as an irregularity. A minor bureaucrat was assigned to investigate. He sent the standard communications to Earth, to the major human colonies, to their trade outposts. The responses that came back were automated acknowledgments, nothing more. The bureaucrat, a nervous Veltari named Quistel, decided to dig deeper. He accessed the public records of human space traffic. What he found made him call for his supervisor immediately. "Sir," Quistel said, his 4 eyes wide with confusion, "I think we have a problem." The supervisor, an older Veltari with decades of experience in galactic administration, reviewed the data twice before calling his own superior. Within hours, the report had reached the senior council members. The traffic records showed something impossible. Every human vessel in known space had filed departure notices over the past 6 months. Every single one. From massive colony ships to small trading vessels, they had all left their registered positions and headed toward the outer rim of the galaxy. There must be some mistake, Counselor Drexmore of the Triumvirate said during an emergency meeting. You can't move 12 billion people without someone noticing. But the deeper they looked, the more impossible it became to deny. Human colonies that had been thriving centers of industry and trade were found completely abandoned, not destroyed, not conquered, simply empty. Personal belongings remained in homes. Automated factories continued to operate. Agricultural systems kept growing food that no one was there to harvest. The discovery teams found no signs of struggle, no evidence of evacuation under duress. It was as if 12 billion humans had simply decided to leave, taking only what they could carry and abandoning everything else. Space traffic control records showed the movement had been gradual but coordinated. Small groups of ships had been leaving human space for months, all heading in the same general direction toward the galactic rim. But beyond the edge of mapped space, the trails went cold. How is this possible? Vexithara demanded during another emergency session. We monitor all major population movements. We track colony ship construction. How did an entire species disappear without us knowing? The answer came from the investigation teams that had been sent to examine the abandoned human worlds. On each planet, in each station, they found the same thing. A single data beacon, hidden but not secret, containing the same message. The message was addressed to the Galactic Council and marked for automatic transmission exactly 1 month after the last human ship left known space. It had been waiting patiently for someone to find it. When they finally activated one of the beacons, Ambassador Chen Wei's face appeared on the screen. She looked tired but determined, sitting in what appeared to be a ship's communications room. "Esteemed members of the Galactic Council," she began, her voice calm and professional, "if you are receiving this message, then our departure has been completed successfully." The words hit the assembled council members like a physical blow. Departure? This had been planned? "I want to thank the Council for the many years of educational experiences you have provided to humanity," Chen continued. "We have learned much about galactic civilization during our time as members of your organization." Vexithera felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in Chen's tone, something that suggested the education hadn't been pleasant. "However," Chen went on, "we have come to the conclusion that our values and goals are incompatible with the current galactic order. Therefore, we have chosen to seek our fortune elsewhere." The message was only 5 minutes long, but it contained information that would shake the foundation of everything the Council thought they knew about their human members. Chen spoke of secret technologies, of hidden preparations, of a plan that had been decades in the making. But the most shocking part came at the end. "We leave behind complete records of our observations during our time in Council space," Chen said. "Consider it a gift to the galaxy. Perhaps future generations will learn from the mistakes of the past." When the message ended, the council chamber fell silent. Outside the great windows, the lights of the capital world twinkled peacefully, unaware that the galaxy had just changed forever. Councillor Zeflin was the first to speak. What did she mean by records? They found out the next day when every major news network in the galaxy received massive data packages containing detailed documentation of council activities over the past 50 years. Military operations that had been classified, trade agreements that had been kept secret, diplomatic communications that were never meant to be public. The humans hadn't just left. They had been watching, recording, and preparing. And now the galaxy would see exactly what kind of civilization the council had built. As reports poured in from across known space, Vexithera sat in her empty office and stared at the holographic star maps on her wall. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of council sensors, 12 billion humans were starting a new life. The question that terrified her was simple. What else had they taken with them? The data packages arrived simultaneously across the galaxy, hitting every major news network, government communication system, and public information channel at exactly the same moment. The coordination was perfect, the timing precise to the nanosecond. It was a level of technical achievement that should have been impossible for a minor species like humanity. Councillor Zeflin stood in the emergency command center that had been hastily set up in the council building's basement. Screens surrounded him, each showing a different news feed from across the galaxy. The headlines scrolled past in dozens of languages, but they all said the same thing. Secrets revealed, cover-ups exposed, lies uncovered. "How bad is it?" asked Councillor Drexmore as he entered the room. The normally composed triumvirate representative looked shaken. His usual perfect grooming was disheveled and his ceremonial robes were wrinkled. "Bad," Zeflin replied without looking away from the screens. "Very bad." The humans had been thorough. 50 years of careful documentation, hidden recordings, and meticulous investigation had produced the largest intelligence leak in galactic history. Military communications that revealed the true reasons behind peacekeeping operations. Trade negotiations that showed how developing worlds were systematically exploited. Private conversations between council members that exposed the casual racism and contempt they held for younger species. On one screen, Zeflin watched a Veltari news anchor struggle to maintain composure as she read from a classified military report. The document detailed how hegemony forces had deliberately destroyed civilian targets during the Outer Rim pacification campaign, then blamed the deaths on rebel terrorists. Another screen showed crowds gathering outside the triumvirate embassy on the industrial world of Keth Prime. The humans had released recordings of private meetings where triumvirate representatives had laughed about the working conditions in the planet's mining operations, calling the native workers expendable resources. But the worst revelations were yet to come. Deep in the data archive, buried among thousands of other documents, was a complete recording of a secret meeting between the three major powers. The meeting had taken place just 5 years ago, in a secure facility that was supposed to be unmonitored. In it, the leaders of the hegemony, ethereal collective, and triumvirate of suns had discussed what they called the final solution to the minor species problem. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Over the next century, they would gradually increase restrictions on developing species, making it impossible for them to advance technologically or economically. Eventually, these species would become completely dependent on the major powers for everything from food to basic manufacturing. Once that dependence was complete, they could be controlled absolutely. The beautiful part, the hegemony supreme leader had said during the recorded meeting, is that they'll thank us for it. They'll see their chains as protection. The recording had been made possible by a device that shouldn't have existed. The meeting room had been swept for surveillance equipment multiple times by the best security teams in the galaxy. But somehow the humans had managed to place a recording device that went completely undetected. Zeppelin felt sick as he listened to his own voice agreeing to the plan. He had convinced himself at the time that it was necessary for galactic stability. Now, hearing his words broadcast across the galaxy, he realized how evil they sounded. The communications officer, a young Devani named Cortesh, approached him with a grim expression. "Sir, we're receiving reports from across the galaxy. Colonial governments are declaring independence. Trade partners are canceling contracts. 3 minor species have formally withdrawn from all council agreements." "How many so far?" Zeppelin asked. 47 worlds in the last 6 hours, Cortesh replied. "And the number is growing." On the screens around them, the news continued to get worse. The Corvin Republic, humanity's closest allies in the council, had announced they were severing all ties with the major powers. Their fleet was already moving to secure their borders. The Veltari synthesis had recalled all their diplomatic personnel and activated their defense forces. But perhaps the most shocking development was happening on the homeworlds of the major powers themselves. Citizens who had been told for generations that their governments were benevolent protectors of galactic peace were learning the truth. Protests were erupting in the capital cities. Government buildings were being surrounded by angry crowds demanding answers. "There's more," Cortesh said quietly. "We've decoded another section of the human data archive. It contains detailed technical specifications." "Specifications for what?" Drexmore demanded. Cortesh hesitated before answering. "Weapons systems, faster-than-light communication arrays, quantum tunneling drives, technologies we've never seen before." Zeppelin felt his heart sink. The humans hadn't just been recording council activities. They had been developing advanced technology in secret, technology that made them far more dangerous than anyone had realized. The technical specifications revealed the scope of human innovation. Their ships could travel faster than anything in the council fleet. Their weapons could penetrate shields that were thought to be impenetrable. Their communication systems operated on principles that council scientists didn't even understand. "How long?" Zeppelin asked. "How long have they been working on this?" The answer came from another section of the archive. Personal logs from Ambassador Chen, recorded over the past 20 years. In them, she described humanity's growing disillusionment with the council and their decision to pursue an independent path. "We came to the council with hope," Chen had recorded in one entry. "We believed in the dream of a galactic community where all species could thrive together. But we quickly learned that the council isn't a community. It's a protection racket run by bullies." The logs detailed how humanity had gradually shifted resources away from their public colonies and towards secret research facilities hidden in unexplored regions of space. They had been planning their exodus for decades, carefully preparing for the day when they would leave council space forever. But the most disturbing revelation came in Chen's final log entry. "We're not the only ones who see the truth about the council," she had recorded. "There are hundreds of species throughout the galaxy who have been oppressed, exploited, and forgotten. We've been in contact with many of them. When we leave, we won't be going alone. The implications of that statement were staggering. The humans hadn't just developed secret technology and disappeared. They had been building a network of allies, preparing for something much larger than a simple exodus. As Zeppelin watched the news feeds, he began to see the pattern. The species that were declaring independence weren't acting randomly. Their announcements were coordinated, their military movements synchronized. They were implementing a plan that had been years in the making. "Sir," Cordesh said, his voice barely a whisper, "there's one more thing. We're detecting massive energy signatures from the galactic rim. Unknown ship configurations, power levels beyond anything in our databases." Zeppelin closed his eyes. The humans were out there somewhere, along with their allies, with technology that made the Council's military might obsolete. And they had left behind proof of every crime, every atrocity, every injustice that the major powers had committed. The galaxy was about to change forever, and there was nothing the Council could do to stop it. On the screens around them, the images showed the same thing over and over. Empty human colonies, abandoned facilities, and protest crowds growing larger by the hour. The old order was crumbling, and from its ashes something new was being born, something that the Council might not survive. The rebellion started on a small agricultural world called Haven's Rest. The planet had been under hegemony control for over 2 centuries, its population forced to grow food for the industrial worlds while their own people barely had enough to eat. When the human data archives revealed the truth about their situation, the farmers put down their tools and picked up weapons. Within hours, similar uprisings were happening across the galaxy. The human revelations had provided the spark, but the fuel for the fire had been building for generations. Species that had been told they were protected members of the galactic community learned they were actually slaves. Colonies that had been promised eventual self-governance discovered those promises were lies. Junior Counselor Kethvar of the Divani Union sat in his modest office, watching his world burn through the window. The Divani had always prided themselves on being neutral arbitrators, the voice of reason in council debates. Now his people were learning that their neutrality had been bought and paid for by the major powers. The protests had started peacefully. Citizens gathering in the capital squares, holding signs demanding answers about their government's role in the council's crimes. But as more details emerged from the human archives, the demonstrations had turned violent. Kethavar's personal communicator buzzed constantly with emergency reports. Government buildings occupied by angry crowds. Military bases surrounded by protesters demanding the resignation of their commanders. Trade centers shut down as workers refused to handle goods produced by slave labor. The worst part was that Kethvar couldn't blame them. The human documents showed meeting after meeting where Divani representatives had agreed to council policies they knew were wrong, simply because they were paid well for their cooperation. His own government had helped cover up massacres, ignored evidence of genocide, and voted to approve trade agreements that amounted to organized theft. "Sir," his aide said from the doorway, "the Prime Minister wants to see you immediately." Kethvar nodded and made his way through the building's back corridors, avoiding the main halls where angry citizens had broken through security. The Prime Minister's office was heavily guarded, but even the security forces looked uncertain. Many of them had family members in the protesting crowds outside. Prime Minister Velquan was an old politician who had spent his entire career building the Divani Union's reputation as honest brokers in galactic affairs. Now he looked like a man who had aged 20 years in the past week. "The game is over," Velquan said without preamble. "The humans have destroyed everything we built." "Maybe what we built deserved to be destroyed," Kethvar replied quietly. Velquan stared at him in shock. "You can't be serious. The Council brought peace to the galaxy. Order, stability, built on lies and oppression," Kethvar shot back. "I've read the archives, Prime Minister. All of them. Do you know what the hegemony did to the Kreshtai Collective? They sterilized an entire planet because the inhabitants refused to mine radioactive materials. 3 billion people died, and we voted to classify it as a natural disaster." "That was different," Velquan said weakly. "The intelligence reports said—" "The intelligence reports were fabricated," Kethvar interrupted. "The humans have the real surveillance data. The Kreshtai were peaceful farmers. Their only crime was saying no to people who weren't used to hearing that word." Outside the office windows, the sounds of the crowd were getting louder. Cathvar could see fires burning in the distance, smoke rising from government buildings that had been stormed by protesters. "What do you want me to do?" Velquan asked. "The people are demanding we withdraw from the council. If we do that, the major powers will crush us, will they?" Cathvar pulled up a tactical display on the room's main screen. "Look at this. The Corvin Republic has already declared independence. The Veltari synthesis recalled their entire diplomatic corps and activated their defense fleets. 47 colonial governments have announced they're no longer recognizing council authority." The display showed the galaxy-wide rebellion in real time. Red markers indicated worlds in open revolt. Yellow showed systems that had declared neutrality. Green represented worlds still under council control. There was far more red and yellow than green. "It's not just us," Kethver continued. "This is happening everywhere. The humans didn't just reveal our crimes. They showed everyone that the council's power was based on fear and lies. Once people stop being afraid, the lies don't work anymore." But the most shocking development was happening in council military forces themselves. Ship after ship was reporting that their crews had mutinied, taking their vessels and joining the rebellion. These weren't just minor patrol craft. Entire battle fleets were switching sides, taking their advanced weapons and defense systems with them. The Veltari synthesis had been the first major ally to openly break with the council. Their leader, Grand Admiral Zocthus, had broadcast a message to the entire galaxy explaining their decision. "For too long, we have been complicit in atrocities committed in the name of peace," Zocthus had said. "The human archives have shown us the true cost of our silence. We can no longer stand by while innocent people suffer for the benefit of the powerful few." The synthesis controlled some of the most advanced manufacturing facilities in the galaxy. Their decision to join the rebellion meant that the rebels would have access to ships, weapons, and supplies that could match anything the council could produce. But the real blow came from an unexpected source. The Moran people had been declared extinct over a century ago, after their homeworld was stripped of resources by triumvirate mining operations. Except, according to the human archives, they weren't extinct at all. The humans had secretly evacuated the surviving Moran population, relocating them to hidden colonies beyond the galactic rim. For over 100 years, the Moran had been building their strength, planning their eventual return. Now, with human technology and decades of preparation, they were ready to reclaim what had been stolen from them. The first sign of their return was the destruction of Mining Station Omega-7, the facility that had been built on the ruins of the Moran homeworld. The station simply vanished one day, along with its entire complement of triumvirate personnel. The only trace was a brief message broadcast on all frequencies. "The dead have returned to collect what is owed." Within days, similar attacks were happening across triumvirate space. Mining operations, industrial facilities, and military outposts were being destroyed by ships using technology that council forces couldn't match. The attackers never demanded surrender, never took prisoners. They simply eliminated their targets and moved on to the next one. Kethvar watched the tactical display update in real time. Each red marker represented another world lost to the rebellion. Each destroyed facility was another blow to the council's economic foundation. "The humans planned this perfectly," he said to Prime Minister Velquan. "They didn't just leave. They spent decades building a network of allies, developing advanced technology, and preparing for this moment. They knew exactly how the council would react when the truth came out. So what do we do?" Velquan asked. Before Kethvar could answer, his communicator buzzed with an urgent message. "Emergency session of the Council Security Committee. All members required to attend immediately." As he made his way to the government transport that would take him to the council building, Kethvar looked back at his burning city. His people were finally free to choose their own path. Even if that choice came with a terrible price. The galaxy was at war, but for the first time in centuries, it wasn't a war between the powerful and the powerless. It was a war between those who wanted to maintain the old system of oppression and those who were willing to fight for something better. And thanks to the humans and their allies, the rebels actually had a chance to win. Fleet Admiral Thoxandra had commanded military operations across the galaxy for over 3 decades. She had crushed rebellions, conquered worlds, and enforced the Council's will through superior firepower and ruthless efficiency. But she had never faced anything like this. The largest military fleet in galactic history stretched out before her flagship, the Eternal Dominion. Over 10,000 ships from the three major powers, united for the first time in centuries by their shared desperation. Their mission was simple: find the humans and make them pay for what they had done to the Galactic Order. Navigation report, Thoxandra commanded as she stood on the bridge of her massive dreadnought. Quantum trail analysis indicates the human Exodus fleet passed through this sector approximately 18 months. Ego, reported the ship's sensor officer, a nervous Veltari who had been reassigned after his people's betrayal. Energy signatures suggest a fleet of at least 8,000 vessels, moving at speeds that should be impossible. Thoxandra studied the holographic display that showed the edge of known space. Beyond this point, the star charts became unreliable. Few ships had ventured into the galactic rim, and fewer still had returned with useful data. It was the perfect place for someone to disappear. They can't hide forever, she muttered. 12 billion people need resources, infrastructure, habitable worlds. They have to be out there somewhere. The fleet had been searching for 3 months now, following faint traces and energy signatures that led deeper into unexplored space. They had found empty star systems, abandoned way stations, and the occasional automated beacon broadcasting warnings in dozens of languages, but no humans. What they had found was far more disturbing. "Admiral," called the communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from Scout Group 7. The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of Commander Vexnall aboard the light cruiser Swift Strike. The normally confident officer looked shaken. "Admiral, we found something you need to see," Vexnall said. It's impossible, but the evidence is right in front of us." "Report," Thoxandra ordered. "We discovered a colony world at coordinates 774 Mark 9. According to our records, this system was surveyed 200 years ago and found to be uninhabited. Primitive life forms only, no signs of intelligence." Thoxandra frowned. "And now?" "Now there's a thriving civilization, population approximately 50 million. They have cities, space stations, defensive platforms, and technology that's more advanced than anything in our databases." The screen changed to show long-range scans of a blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. The planet's surface was dotted with massive cities connected by transportation networks that could be seen from orbit. In space around the world, defensive installations hung like metal flowers, their weapons arrays tracking the Council scout ships. "What species are they?" Thoxandra asked. "That's the impossible part, Admiral. They're Kethmori." Thoxandra felt her blood turn cold. The Kethmori collective had been exterminated by hegemony forces over 50 years ago. Their crime had been refusing to surrender their homeworld for strip mining operations. The planet had been sterilized from orbit, and every Kethmori in the galaxy had been hunted down and killed. "The Kethmori are extinct," she said flatly. "That's what our records say," Vexnall replied. "But these people are definitely Kethmori. They're broadcasting on traditional frequencies, using their native language, and their biosignatures match archived data perfectly." Before Thoxandra could respond, a new voice came through the communication system. It spoke in accented galactic standard, but the underlying tone was unmistakably Kethmori. "Council vessels, you are not welcome in this system. You have 30 minutes to leave our space or face the consequences." Thoxandra activated her command chair's communication array. "This is Fleet Admiral Thoxandra of the Galactic Council Defense Force. You will stand down your weapons and prepare to be boarded for inspection." The response came back immediately. "Admiral Thoxandra, we have you in our records. You personally commanded the operation that murdered our people and destroyed our homeworld. You are the last person in the galaxy who should be making demands of us." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in silence. Thoxandra stared at the tactical display, trying to understand what she was seeing. The Kethmori defensive platforms were powering up weapons that didn't match any known design. Energy readings were climbing to levels that should have been impossible for a species that was supposed to be dead. "How are they alive?" She asked no one in particular. The answer came from an unexpected source. The main communication array activated on its own, displaying a message that originated from somewhere beyond the Kethmori system. The transmission was crystal clear despite the vast distance, suggesting technology far beyond anything the Council possessed. A human face appeared on the screen. Not Ambassador Chen, but a younger woman with similar features and the same determined expression. "Admiral Thoxandra," the woman said. "My name is Director Sarah Chen Park, Coalition of Free Worlds. I believe you're looking for us." Thoxandra leaned forward in her command chair. "Where are you?" "Closer than you think, Admiral. But that's not important right now. What's important is that you understand what you're really facing." The display changed to show a three-dimensional map of the galactic rim. Hundreds of star systems were marked with symbols Thoxandra didn't recognize. Each one showed signs of habitation, industry, and military installations for 50 years. While you were busy congratulating yourselves on bringing peace to the galaxy, we were busy doing something else, Director Chen Park continued. We were rescuing the people you tried to destroy. Every species you declared extinct, every population you scattered, every civilization you crushed. We found them, saved them, and gave them new homes. The implications were staggering. The Council had been operating under the assumption that their enemies were dead or broken. Instead, those enemies had been growing stronger, building new civilizations and preparing for this moment. The Kethmori you just threatened are one of dozens of species that the Council tried to exterminate, Chen Park said. They've had 50 years to rebuild, to develop new technology and to plan their revenge. But they chose something better than revenge. They chose freedom. More ships began appearing on the tactical display, not the primitive vessels the Council had expected, but sleek craft using propulsion systems that bent the laws of physics. They moved with impossible speed and agility, surrounding the massive Council fleet without seeming effort. You came here looking for 12 billion humans, Chen Park said. What you found instead is something much larger. 800 species, 500 billion people, and technology that makes your weapons look like toys from a bygone era. Commander Vexnall's voice crackled through the communication system. Admiral, we're being scanned by technologies we don't understand. Our shields are being penetrated like they don't exist. Thoxandra looked at the tactical display and realized the truth. Her massive fleet, the pride of the Council's military might, was completely outmatched. They had come here to hunt down a minor species and instead found themselves face to face with a galactic superpower. What do you want? She asked Director Chen Park. Nothing from you, Admiral. Your time is over. The galaxy has moved beyond the need for your kind of peace. We're building something better, something based on cooperation instead of domination. The alien ships began to withdraw, not retreating but simply disengaging. They had made their point. The Council fleet was allowed to live, but only because the Coalition chose to let them live. Return to Council space, Admiral, Chen Park said. Tell your leaders what you found here. Tell them that the age of empires built on fear and oppression is ending. Tell them that the galaxy has found a better way. The transmission ended, leaving Thoxandra alone with the knowledge that everything she had believed about the galaxy was wrong. The humans hadn't just disappeared. They had evolved into something far beyond what the Council could control, and they were no longer alone. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stood nearly empty. Where once 300 species had gathered to debate the affairs of the galaxy, now barely 50 delegates remained. The ornate seats of the major powers looked small and isolated in the vast chamber, their occupants huddled together like survivors of a disaster. Councillor Vexthera, now serving as emergency chancellor after 3 of her predecessors had been assassinated by their own people, called the session to order with a heavy heart. The agenda contained only one item, the formal dissolution of the Galactic Council. 2 years had passed since the humans revealed the truth about Council rule. 2 years of rebellion, economic collapse, and military defeat. The galaxy that had once bowed to Council authority now looked upon them with hatred and contempt. Fellow representatives, Vexthera began, her voice echoing in the nearly empty chamber. We gather today to discuss the future of our organization in light of recent developments. Such mild words to describe the complete collapse of everything they had built over 1,000 years. The major powers had lost over 80% of their territory. Their economies were in ruins. Their military forces had either defected or been destroyed by technologies they couldn't understand. The rebellion had spread far beyond what anyone thought possible. Worlds that had been loyal to the Council for centuries had declared independence overnight. Military commanders who had sworn oaths of loyalty had turned their fleets against their former masters. Even the core worlds of the major powers themselves were in open revolt. Councillor Zephlin of the Ethereal Collective looked like a shadow of his former self. The revelation that his people had been complicit in genocide had destroyed their reputation as wise spiritual guides. Ethereal colonies across the galaxy had been abandoned by populations who could no longer stomach their leaders' crimes. The reports from our remaining territories are unanimous, Zephlin said quietly. Our people no longer trust us to govern. They demand accountability for what they're calling the Great Deception. The Great Deception. That was what historians were already calling the 1,000-year period of council rule. A millennium of lies about peace and prosperity while entire species were enslaved or exterminated behind closed doors. But the worst was yet to come. As the delegates prepared to begin the formal dissolution process, every communication array in council space activated simultaneously. The same impossible coordination that had marked the release of the human archives 2 years earlier. Director Sarah Chen Park appeared on the main display, but she was not alone. Behind her stood representatives of dozens of species, many of whom the council had believed to be extinct. The sight of them alive and thriving was a dagger to the heart of everything the major powers had claimed about their civilizing mission. Members of the former Galactic Council, Director Chen Park began, I am speaking to you today on behalf of the Coalition of Free Worlds. We represent 837 species who have chosen freedom over subjugation. 837 species. The number hit the remaining council delegates like a physical blow. At its height, the council had claimed to represent just over 300 species. The coalition had grown beyond anything they had imagined possible. For over 2 years you have ignored our request for dialogue, Chen Park continued. You have refused to acknowledge your crimes or make amends for the suffering you have caused. Today that changes. The display split to show images from across the galaxy. Massive fleets emerging from hyperspace around council worlds, defense platforms that appeared from nowhere, surrounding military installations, ground forces materializing in government centers with technology that made them seem like ghosts. But there was no violence. No weapons fire, no explosions, no death. The coalition forces simply appeared and waited, their mere presence enough to paralyze any resistance. The galaxy stands at a crossroads, Chen Park said. You can continue to cling to the illusion that your empire can be rebuilt, or you can face the reality that your time is over. The choice is yours, but you will not be allowed to cause any more suffering while you make it. Vexithara found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. What do you want from us? Justice, Chen Park replied simply. Not revenge, not destruction, but justice. The crimes committed by the council must be acknowledged. The damage must be repaired. The victims must be compensated. And those responsible must face judgment. The terms that followed were not negotiated. They were presented as facts as inevitable as the rising of a star. The major powers would surrender their military forces and submit to international tribunals. They would pay reparations to every species they had wronged. Their leaders would face trial for crimes against sapient life, but perhaps most importantly, they would be restricted to their core systems for the next century. Forbidden from expanding or interfering with other worlds. They would be given time to reflect on their actions and hopefully learn to be better. This is not punishment for its own sake, Chen Park explained. This is about breaking the cycle of oppression that has plagued the galaxy for too long. Your species have great potential for good, but only if you can move beyond your need to dominate others. Counselor Drexmoor of the Triumvirate struggled to his feet, his aged form trembling with rage. You cannot do this to us. We brought order to the galaxy. We created civilization. You created a hierarchy with yourselves at the top, Chen Park replied calmly. You confused oppression with order, exploitation with civilization. The galaxy is better without your kind of peace. The evidence was undeniable. In the 2 years since the Council's authority had collapsed, conflicts between species had actually decreased. Without the major powers stirring up trouble to maintain their dominance, most disputes were being resolved through negotiation and compromise. The coalition had provided a framework for cooperation that didn't require submission to imperial authority. How? Zephlin asked. How did you build all of this without us knowing? Because you stopped seeing us as people, Chen Park answered. To you, we were resources to be managed, problems to be solved, or threats to be eliminated. You never bothered to consider that we might be working together, learning from each other, growing stronger while you grew complacent. The truth was more painful than any physical torture. The Council had failed not because they were defeated in battle, but because they had never understood what they were fighting against. They had seen individual species rebelling and hadn't realized those species were part of something much larger. The humans taught us something important, Chen Park continued. They showed us that real strength doesn't come from fear or dominance. It comes from cooperation, from mutual respect, from the willingness to help others even when there's no immediate benefit to yourself. One by one, the remaining council delegates began to understand that they had no choice. Their fleets were destroyed or captured. Their economies were collapsed. Their people had abandoned them. They could accept the coalition's terms or face complete destruction, but even in defeat, some truths were hard to accept. "You're making a mistake," Vexithara said. "Without central authority, the galaxy will fall into chaos. There will be wars, conflicts, suffering on a scale you can't imagine." "Perhaps," Chen Park acknowledged, "but that will be our mistake to make, not yours. The galaxy has the right to choose its own path even if that path leads to failure. What it doesn't have is the right to be enslaved for its own good." The vote was unanimous. The Galactic Council formally dissolved itself, ending over 1,000 years of imperial rule. The Great Hall fell silent as the delegates filed out for the final time, leaving behind the symbols of power that no longer meant anything. As Vexthera walked through the empty corridors of the council building, she reflected on the legacy they were leaving behind. They had ruled the galaxy through fear and deception, and in the end, the truth had destroyed them more completely than any weapon could have. Outside, the capital world was quiet. The massive protests and riots had ended months ago, replaced by a strange sort of peace. The coalition had kept their promise. There was no occupation, no revenge, no punishment beyond what justice demanded. The galaxy was free to choose its own future, and for the first time in 1,000 years, that choice belonged to everyone, not just the powerful few. The humans had departed silently, but their judgment had spoken loud enough to change everything.